Well, good morning, everybody. We're back about volcanic marriages, and we're discussing trust. And it's great to have Pastors Liesel and Rion with us this morning again. And I'm sure you're going to be blessed about what we're going to discuss. We spoke about trust last week, and we chose the picture of the couple with a little child, because the word says we must become as little children. And if you think our children trust, it's just open-heartedly. They just jump into the Father's arms. They know they're safe. But what we want to look at this morning is, once you've dealt with a trust issue, and as we discussed last week, like Liesel, you opened up to Rion, and we spoke about the trust issue. How do we move forward from then? And is it all plain sailing from then? Okay, I see by the reaction, and we've been mind to, it's not all plain sailing. So, what do we do? Liesel, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, since our discussion last week, I've been thinking a bit about trust, and my experience is that it's very, very fragile. And so this morning, as I was sitting on the stoop, the image that came to me, it's just my understanding of trust, is Rihanna's on this side and I'm on that side, and in between us we've got a wooden plank. And both of us are holding onto this plank, and on the plank is a glass ball. And in the glass ball is intimate stuff that Rihanna shared with me in confidence, and intimate stuff that I've shared with Rihanna in confidence. Right. That's what's in the glass ball.
Right.
And so trust for me in a marriage, this is my picture, is us balancing this glass ball, me holding onto the one side of the plank and Rihanna holding onto the other side. And that's really my experience, is it's very fragile. Yeah. And you have to be working at it all the time. If you don't, the glass ball can fall and break. Yeah. And that's the thing, you can build trust, but you must really look after it. And it's a continual thing.
Yeah, I think the important thing is it's a continual working at it. Absolutely. So once you've opened and you've been transparent and you've made yourself vulnerable, it doesn't stop there. Yeah. You've shared those things, but now you've got to keep that. Yeah. And as I was sharing with you earlier, Tish and I found, and I used to say to her, once we're through a trust issue, it just gives you the courage and boldness to press in, but you've got to know another wave's coming. And you've got to be prepared for that, because when you resolve the initial trust issues, doesn't mean it's not going to reoccur. And I think keeping focus and working on it, but knowing that God's in the center of it, as we said last week, is the important thing. So to focus on God. And something that came to mind as you shared, you both holding the plank, you both got to be focused on each other. Actually, not the bowl. Yeah. So you can't be focused on the issue, but on one another. Rion?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely so. Trust is very, very, very fragile at the end of the day. One of the things we said last week was essentially there's a point where you come into real trust.
Yes.
And I think that's important. I call it the trust line. I just gave it that name, but it's a trust line. And I think sometimes, not sometimes, as I said, you come into that space, you start to trust, and that's where the trust line starts. And then as the trust relationship develops, you actually start to deal with issues that were in the past.
Yes.
I remember one incident that I felt hurt by what Liesl had done, and I was able to tell her now, because we trust each other, that incident 20 years ago made me sad. And she was able to say, well, I'm sorry for that. And that incident is, in other words, now behind the trust line. Yeah. And I think when one reaches a trust line, and you've developed a trust line, to keep those things that you have dealt with in the past that sit behind the trust line. Yeah. And as we discussed this morning, if one of those issues come up again, maybe even the same issue for which she said she's sorry, to just take hold of that thought and in Christ just push it out of your heart, because if you take hold of it again, you start a cycle again. But it's wonderful it's been dealt with in the trust line, and you could focus on the fact that your partner said, I'm sorry. Because I think we all have incidents beyond in the past that sometimes we've held on to, we've never dealt with, we're still upset about it. Yeah. If we reflect long enough, we go into that space. So it's important that once you reach the trust line, to keep that which is behind the trust line there, if they come up again, to push them back behind the trust line.
Yeah. I think that's important. I think something of value to me that you said was, something that happened 20 years ago. and we hold on to these things instead of just bearing ourselves to one another and saying, listen, this is what happened. And I think once that glass bowl is there, but once you've dealt with certain trust issues, to realize, just get rid of everything from the past. I think that's so important. Because we can't move forward if we're hanging on to things that happened in the past. The word says, Jesus, if you put your hand to the plow and you turn back, you're not fit for the kingdom of heaven. So we can't keep turning back and saying, yeah, but this happened 10 years ago. Deal with it.
Yes.
And I think deal with it ASAP, as hard as what it might seem. And I think from both of you, and I think as I was sharing with you our experience as well with teaching myself, it's a fight. And we said last year, you've got to fight for that marriage. You've got to fight for it. And in the long term, and after many, many years, nearly 44 years, you look and you think it was worth it. Those fights are worth it. That going through that pain and dying to yourself is worth it. Because there's a friendship and companionship that develops that everybody longs for. But it doesn't just happen because we're all products of our past. And I think what you said, Rihanna, is so important to even bring up issues from long ago. Get it dealt with. It hurts for a minute. As we said earlier this morning, a dead man, you can kick a dead man, but he doesn't react. And it's a dying to self, which isn't an easy process, is it? I don't think it's easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other things that I wanted to say last time is that what I notice is that it's difficult in the world, and here's a couple, and they've got to survive the world. But what happens is instead of they're fighting with each other, they've got their backs turned to the world, so the world has just got free flow against them.
Yes.
But what has to happen is they actually have to both turn back to back and be able to look out in both directions to the world. But to be able to turn your back on your spouse, you need to trust them, because you have to put your vulnerable side that side. And so it's becoming vulnerable towards each other so that we can actually deal with the world around us as a team. But I notice, and this is the same for us, where we were fighting and we were arguing, we turned this way around in a world which is actually difficult and hostile.
Yeah.
And so it's ironic, isn't it, that you make yourself vulnerable to the world, but you don't make yourself vulnerable to your spouse.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think last week we said it's easy to forgive those outside the marriage, and yet not in the marriage, and forgiveness is so important. But I think the same applies to what you're saying. And I think it's because we desire that closeness, that companionship. We desire to sit with one another and be safe and trust one another. And when we hurt, it's so difficult because something gets shattered, that glass bowl. And I think to keep working towards it. But just for a second or two, and just bear with me, so wives, you can get your husbands to tune in now. The word says a lot about the man and the man's responsibility in this, but we together as one, husband and wife, both got their parts to play. But I was just sharing with Rion and Liesel this morning that came to me is that I think in future, if I married, counsel anybody who's getting married, which means I think a lot of you won't come to me after you hear this, I'm going to ask the man, are you prepared to be committed? Are you prepared to be the man in this situation? The man wants to be the man in the bedroom, but then he needs to be the man everywhere else. And you know, the word says, for this reason, a man will leave his mother and father and be united, cleave to his wife, and they become one. And in the world we live in today, and I did discuss this with Rion and Liesel, so they're okay with it, is, you know, men grow up. When you get married and you take a wife, you're actually leaving your mommy and your daddy behind. And I think there are a lot of mommy's boys out there, and in a sense they want their wife, who's there to be their helpmeet and companion, to be mommy as well. And she's not there to be your mother. She's there to be your helpmeet, to work through life together, to bring your children up together, to work through issues together so that you become one. And I just think men, sometimes you just need to take up your responsibility in the marriage. The word does say that husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So I think men, you often think, well, wife, I've got to do everything. Well, you know, what you sow, you'll reap. And you want to reap good stuff out of your wife, you've got to sow it. You've got to wash her with the word. You've got to speak the word. Even when you want to throttle her, you just love her and you speak the word to her. But guys, please, I think wives get put in a very awkward situation. I don't know if you agree or disagree with me. When the husband expects to be mommied, it's not a comfortable situation. She's not your mother. And I would just like to add to that, when you have problems, I don't believe you should run back to mommy and daddy. We must keep the marriage bed undefiled. You become one. I think the way you grow and mature is to sort your problems out together. And a lot of issues I found in married couples has been where either the husband or the wife go back and chat to the mom and dad. Obviously, the parents are biased and they'll take their child's point of view. So, you know what, men grow up. Take that responsibility. When you stand there and say, I do, you're actually saying, today I'm becoming a man, I'm going to take responsibility, I'm accountable. I need to make this woman blessed and happy and comfortable and secure. In that way, I will have my needs met as well. Not that it's a payoff, but that's just the way it works. Yeah. So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, I think it's very true. I wonder if there doesn't come a point where you have to decide. To take responsibility.
Yes.
And so I can say, you know, Rian's taken responsibility. But the one thing I want to share while you're talking about it is I think what's really important for mothers, I'm a mother of 2 sons, and my prayer is that I would be a mother-in-law to my daughters-in-law. Is that right?
Yeah.
The way that Rian's mom has been a mother-in-law to me, she's welcomed me with open arms. If Rian and I were to go to her with a problem, which I don't think we did, she would not have chosen his side.
Oh, that's great.
That is phenomenal.
Sure.
So I think as a mom raising 2 boys, I must raise boys in such a way that I can give them off to a wife so that they can become one. And I have to set my heart on that already.
Sure.
It's just
That's
something
good.
to share now.
Excellent. Yeah.
I've been praying that God would just help me to be like my mom-in-law. She's really such a blessing.
But I think it's important how you want to raise your sons.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of issues, as we spoke earlier, comes from childhood. Either you've been in the era I was brought up, kids must be seen and not heard, things like that. So you are inhibited to share your feelings and to build trust. And also, I hate to say this, but overpowering mommies, mommies who protect too much, create problems. And I think to help children build trust in a marriage, we have a responsibility to school them in that. And I think that's great what you're doing in your heart, Liesl. And I'd just like to say, if anybody hasn't had that type of upbringing, well, you're in Christ now.
Yes.
And you're a new creation. You've got to choose to live that life in Christ and choose who you are in Christ and cut that off, cut those family ties off. But I think what you said is so important. And if any of you got kids, boys or girls, I think that's good advice. Rian, what do you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other realization we must have is how easily we isolate.
Sure.
So one of the parts of isolation is that we go back to that which is familiar. But when you marry a spouse, that's somebody new. That it's not your mother.
No.
It's not your father that you have to get to know. This is a new person. So it's a completely new adventure. And if you think about adventure, it's difficult, it's tough.
Yes.
But if you're going to come to a tough part in your marriage and choose isolation, most probably you're going to refer back to what is known. You're going to go back to mom because mom understands me.
Yes.
My wife doesn't understand me, or dad understands me, my husband doesn't understand me.
Yeah.
So central to a lot of these issues is the fact that you haven't made the decision that this is now my wife to whom I cleave.
Yeah.
This is the adventure I've embarked on. It's not going to be easy, I'm going to stick it. But I'm not going to go back second best to that which is familiar to me, because familiar is safe. I mean,
very.
And if you're hurting in the adventure, it's very easy to go to somebody who understands you and you can care for you. So I think there has to be a decision that this is the adventure. And I think if we're talking about isolation, which sort of flows out of it, is often we choose isolation to protect our feelings.
Yes.
But you've got to be careful for isolation. What happens is you start cutting off. And what's possible, and we've seen this, haven't we all? We've seen this, that there are marriages where people are literally just living together. And it's very low level. Nobody's prepared to take any risks anymore.
Married singles.
Married singles, happy in that space. And there can be no life in that, because the adventure, God never set the standard at just surviving with each other.
No.
But again, as we take the journey and we go into adventure, it's not easy.
No. But I'd just like to build on what you're saying. I think when we get married, we accept one another for who we are. But as we get into the marriage, and sorry guys, but I'm a man and this does apply to us, you sort of expect your wife to be a bit like your mother and kiss and put the Band-Aid on when you've got a problem and cuddle you and model cuddle you and you do everything for you, cook for you and clean for you and iron for you. And I think a big part in avoiding disappointment or breaking trust or being disappointed is allow the spouse to be an individual. They are an individual with their own slant, with their own giftings. It took me a long time to get used to the fact that Tish wasn't someone who's going to spend hours in the kitchen. And we made no bones about this. We talk about this to everybody. She actually said to me, why would someone sleep in the kitchen for hours and hours and 10 minutes you've eaten it, it's finished, it's a waste of time. And I remember when both our kids were overseas and I was working my study and it was summer, so it didn't get dark too quickly. And I suddenly thought, yeah, I'm hungry. And I looked and it was past 7. And Tisha's in her study and I said, sweetie, we're going to eat tonight. She says, oh, do you want food? Now, I could have got the hang in there and said, oh, woman, you're the woman. My mother always cooked for my father, which she did. And I think that comparing is bad news. But I learned to accept the fact that Tisha's gifting was teaching. She loved studying. She loved being in books. She loved reading. And it wasn't that she wasn't taking notice of me, but that was who she is. And I had to allow her that freedom as much as she had to allow me to be the mad hatter I am and cope with me. And I think a big thing where we get disappointed and then a loss of trust comes in is, but my wife's not like my mother, or I expect my wife to be in the kitchen, do a 3-course meal. Of course, Tish loved baking. Her crunchies were great, muffins were great, so I lived well. But I think just honor each other's individuals. If you want to make your wife like you are, then it's a totally wrong perception.
I think it's a huge point that you're touching on. And a thing that I heard that really made me laugh was this guy said, marriage is a process of becoming one. And the question is, which one? I found it so funny. Because what he's saying is, it's not which one.
No.
Somehow in your individuality, in this process, you find the oneness that God intended, and that's a fight and a process.
Absolutely, I think oneness isn't like you're saying which one. A lot of women, we know that joke, walking down the aisle saying, I'll alter him, and then the husbands expect the wives to do what he wants and the way he wants it. And we don't realize we're causing so much conflict and disappointment that will eventually result in arguments or something that breaks trust. And if you just accept your wife for who she is, and I think we all know this, so here's bad news for you who don't think so. Normally, opposites attract. It's a fact. I mean, the two magnets, it's got to be north and south to attract. And here's a marriage with a north and a south, and what we're trying to do is make the south become a north, and then it's all crippled. And our marriages get crippled when we can't respect the other person for who they are. And the wonderful thing is, what we found out took a long time, a number of years, but actually you complement each other anyway. I think God puts people together to complement each other. But if we can't see that, then you start thinking, well, the person doesn't care for me, she's not doing what I wanted, and this, how can I trust her? And really, where is that thought pattern from? God created us each with our own giftings as individuals. He's given us specific giftings and callings, and if we honor and respect that, we'll become the right one. Yeah, sorry, Lisa, you were going to say.
Yeah. Now, just another thing that you said earlier that made me think was, I think trust enables me to keep a short account.
Excellent.
So the thing is, if I don't trust, then I don't want to share. Yes. And then I wait a long time to share until there's a trust, we step into the trust line or over the trust line. Yeah. And then I can live with a short account because it's really, really important. So if something happens now that hurts me, obviously there's a right time, but I have to make sure that my heart is right before God, and then I address it as quickly as I can in a loving way where my heart's clean, so I don't accuse him and I don't offend. Because my heart's clean, and then I bring it before we sort it out.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah, I think another thing that we forget is that you've said it, but it might be that you marry, but your wife's paradigm and your paradigm differ completely. Yeah. And by that I don't mean just sort of beliefs. I mean values, which is interesting because when you get married, you know, you fall in love, you get married, but you don't really know each other's value sets. And it becomes very difficult when you are passionate about certain thing, you place a great value on that, but your spouse doesn't place a value on it. Yes. Then there's disconnect. And then you've got to try and find each other across value sets. Yeah. And I think that's where it gets very difficult in marriage, because you can deal with the stuff, the toothbrush and the rest, but value sets, where you place your value, and then you come to your spouse and you're excited about something, but they're not, because they're absolutely. And then they come to you and they're excited about something, but you're not. So what's required is very deep, in the sense that you must come to that space that you were speaking of, to actually enjoy the difference.
Yes. Yeah.
And then secondly, to understand the difference. So one of the things I struggle with is just listening. To actually sit and listen. To
most men, Rion, most men.
Is it most men? I thought it was just me. So you have to listen, and then you've got to have an open heart to hear that value system and not reject it. Because what you usually do, I think, is we try and shape the other ones. It was what you said. We try and push their value system to align with ours. But there's a quiet place of resolve where you realize that this is who God has made, and this is who I shall love, with that value set included. So it's really important to take the journey and not to settle for isolation and disconnect and just tolerance of each other's value sets. There's a space where there's actually a coming together. When you said opposite attracts, if you look at Liesl and our value sets, they differ. Yes. So we had to figure that out. And then what I've also realized is when you put us together, there's a sturdiness that happens, because I cover certain areas in her and she covers certain areas in me. And that's incredibly important for ministry, especially because very often it'll be Liesl and her value sets that carry me in ministry through certain bridges that I can't get across. Yeah. And so then God, in His all-knowing glory, knew that this had to happen somehow. Yeah. So why would we again fight like this when we can go back to back against each other and really enjoy the different value sets? But it does require, I think, Andre, a level of maturity. You've got to come to a point where you say, okay, that's okay. And I don't have to change that. And I don't have to be threatened by that.
No.
Receive it.
No. And I think, Leon, as well, though, I'm talking again from a man's point of view this morning. I think men have got a lot of pressure on them because they want to be the man. And they feel they have to be the type of husband and shotguns. And,
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood, you know. And I don't know how many of you remember Clint Eastwood. We're going back a few years. But you want to be the man. And actually, that's not how God created it. It's the God life, the Zoe life in you that counts. Who you are as a man of God. I think that the wife loves and longs for.
Yes.
You can. We've had people who've had all the wealth and everything they could have. You come sit in our lounge and weep and say, "I give it all up for one day of happiness." So it's not the stuff. Or it's not how macho you are, or whether you're Mr. Universe or whatever. I think, Liesl, you can correct me, I think a woman just wants that man to love her and to be there for her and to be secure in him. But I think if men could just use that you can cry as a man. I mean, we use that often. And sometimes good to cry with your wife. And I just think you spoke about the differences. And Liesl might get excited about something that you're not interested in. I learned from a couple from a different culture who told me their parents chose them for their marriage. Okay. And they were told, learn to be companions and love will follow. And how in the first few years of marriage they liked each other, but they hadn't fallen in love. Okay. But they would find out what were common interests. And if one liked something, the other one would show an interest in it. And then suddenly discover, oh, but that is nice. And how they said that after a few years, they suddenly were in love. And I think we do things back to front. We think, oh, I'm in love, great stuff, woohoo, and you go, and then, the wheel is flat, because we don't spend time in the world we live in today, so rushed and busy, to actually be those companions. What does my wife like? Oh, Liesel's interested in that. Let me find out why. And what makes her enjoy that. And that makes her feel secure that you're not just listening, but you're interested. And even though it's not your cup of tea, but you will find that a common thing starts developing. And what that couple shared with me, Tish and I often would speak about it and say, if only Western married couples would take the time, first few years before babies now come, to be companions. Find out what each other likes, share those things, and that love, it cements that love. So it's very important.
I think men should also be careful because we do have this, while we're talking about men, we do have the focus to be providers.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to go hide in your, workspace. And
a dangerous one.
And what I've seen is you can actually go through your entire life and end up at a very old age and be unhappy, look back and wish you'd done it differently. And so, especially in our culture, we don't have to have nice clothes in the house. We don't have to have the best car. We don't have to impress anybody.
No.
It's more valuable to actually have a relationship with your wife. And so work will come to an end, but a relationship is something that lasts into eternity. So I think men must just take hold of that. Obviously it's a balancing act because you have to provide for your family and the work asks, but you really have to be very, very focused on doing the connection that you spoke of now. I think, I might be wrong, I might be generalizing, but for men it's easy to slip into the work mode.
Very easy.
And to leave the complications of chatting to my wife and finding out what she likes and the troubles and the ups and downs of that, and to leave it instead of pushing in through the breakthrough with the eye on the finish line. I think that's important.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with me. And we escape into our work. And we're missing the most vital part of our life that can help us in our work. But if you have a good relationship together, if your communication's good, your sexual life is good, you're open, trustworthy, you work better. You're a better man and a better person. But the sad thing is, and Tish and I met one or two people like this, I mean, at the end of their lives, when their work came to an end, there was no companionship, no relationship with their spouse. And the couple had nothing in common. And so then, after all those years of marriage, you'd find they get divorced. Because all the time he put into his work, if you just taken a disciplined portion, and I say discipline because it takes discipline. It takes discipline to spend time with your wife or your wife with you, because you've got your kids, you provide in all this. But I also think if you look at the word, we have to work or we shall not eat. But I think if our work life can be, I'm providing for my family. But what's the best form of provision? To have a solid, stable family life, to give a legacy to my children, for my children to see how I handle my relationship with my wife. That is provision for the next generation.
If I can share something on this, there are few things, and I had to learn to open up, but there are really few things that get me. Like when Rian really shares with me. That really touches me, and there's nothing that compares to that. No. When I know that he's honest, and I can see he's opening up and he's sharing with me. And that moment of connect is really sparks a lot of other things.
Yeah.
It really does.
It does.
You know, so he can provide financially and whatever, but if we miss each other, there is an emptiness and there is a disconnect, even though sometimes I don't want to admit it because it's really difficult for me, the way that I live. But I just want to share for the men, I want to say that the one thing it gets to me is when Rian really opens up and shares and we connect. That's really precious. So I just want to say that.
Yeah. So I think, men, there are two things this morning. Take responsibility and accountability. Listen to your wives. Listen. Show interest. And as Liesel's been saying, take that time to just bare your heart to your spouse, to your wife. That's what she wants. She'll love you to bits, you know. She really will. And I think, I'm not saying that the wife hasn't got a role to play in this, because you very clearly said that last week. So it is for both to play the part. But I think ultimately, fight the good fight. Know that the battle's not over the first time, but it's going to equip you and make you a better person to face the next thing, understand the benefit of it and the blessing of it. And of course, God's got to be the center. Christ definitely has to be the center of everything. Otherwise, we lose out. And don't have a short-term thing about your marriage. Well, it's okay now, it's next week, well, and then go back to your old ways. You've got to die to yourself. You've got to change. You've got to listen. And things that have been shared here from you are so important, guys. Take note. This is what brings life into the marriage. And you know, guys are always looking to earn points. But you don't have to earn points if you do this, because it's not earning points. Things will happen naturally. And there'll be a natural flow of affection and love and togetherness. And I think that's the greatest thing. It can be passed on to children and children's children anyway, because you want your children to be blessed and have a great marriage. So, a last word from Rian or Liesel?
Yeah, I just think keep your eyes on Jesus. That's the most. He is the one. And really, as this relationship deepens, as well. And I think the theme that's come, you know, be vulnerable to Christ and be vulnerable to your wife or your husband, and trust Him. Trust God, trust your spouse. Work the trust line.
Amen.
Amen. I just want to close with what a very wise man said to me when Tish and I were going through a bit of a difficulty. And I said to him, yes, but I've got rights. And he very gently tried to work around that. And when I came home, I still said, but Lord, I'm a human being. I've got rights. And the Lord very gently told me, you have no rights. Everything is in me, and it's my will. So when we start saying, I've got rights, it's actually pride and me, and it's all about me and my ego. And actually God said to me, you have no rights. All that you have is my will. Submit to my will. And I think if we can do that, you are going to have a great marriage. And marriage is good. Let me tell you that marriage is good. Marriage is great. And at the end of the time of your marriage and your time on earth, you're going to look back and say, I'm so blessed I stuck it out. Because now I've got a companion, I've got a friend, and I can just relate to them in a special way. So I want to encourage you, run the race, persevere. Don't stop running the race. Get your second breath. And we often need that. But you know what? The second breath comes in the race. And we just pray God will richly bless your marriages. And we hope this has been useful to you. Please let us know if it has. And we just pray every blessing God has for you. May you understand that when you die to self, the less of you, more of Him. And when He comes in, you will never lack. He is your shepherd. You will lack for nothing. So we just pray that the Lord will bless you. His face will shine upon you. And you'll experience His peace and His joy. And remember, He gives us wisdom. And I think if there's anything we need in the marriage is wisdom. And the Lord says, just ask and He'll give it to you liberally. I trust you'll do that. And the reason we're getting together is we just want to share things to you that is practical, happens in every marriage. So you're not out there alone. There's no lone rangers in a marriage. We all walk down the same aisle. So our hearts are to bless you. Thanks for tuning in, and we're going to see you soon. Take care and God bless.